So welcome to this video. My name is Alex, and in this video, as usual, I'm going to talk about God. And the reason I want to talk about God is because there really is no more important thing to put our attention on. There is no more important subject to turn our mind towards. But we don't need to turn our mind towards mental understandings and concepts about God. We need to turn our mind to God Himself. Because this is what makes everything else fall into place. This is what makes the world make sense. This is what makes our inner experiences make sense. When we turn our mind to God and we essentially join our mind with God's mind, then all confusion must fade away. All division and conflict must fade away. And all resistance and struggle and fear must fade away. And these are important things, a life full of fear or a life full of conflict and struggle and resistance tells us there is something wrong, there is something out of sync, out of tune. And of course, we look at this world and it seems like there are many, many big problems. It seems like everything has gone wrong. Now, this is obviously from the human perspective, because we're all human, and we're looking at the world and we're looking at the world events from a human perspective. But we can look at the world and the world events from God's perspective. And when we do this, then everything makes a lot more sense. Let me ask you this question. If you were God and you wanted all your children to turn back towards you, imagine all your children had gone wandering off, they'd turned their back on you and had gone wandering off into the jungle or into the desert or into some dangerous place without any protection. They'd gone wandering off, and you cared about them, and you really loved them, and you desperately wanted them to come home where they belong, to safety, protection, endless joy and peace. Well, what would you do? How would you get your children to turn around? Well, of course, God has given us free will so that we can wander off if we choose, and we can go off and leave Him behind and turn our back on Him and even deny His existence. And He will not stop us. But He will continue to call out to us. He will continue to make His presence known and felt. Of course, many people ignore those calls from God and convince themselves that it's just something else, it's just their mind, or they keep themselves in denial. They close their mind to the fact that God is calling them. God is talking to them. So, as I said, God wants us to come back home. And what God knows with absolute certainty, is that there are things out there in the world that we simply cannot face or simply cannot deal with. We have no way of dealing with them without Him. Imagine we've all gone wandering off in the jungle and there's poisonous animals, poisonous snakes that hide, that we have no way of dealing with, no way of protecting ourselves from, because they're deadly and they can strike at an extremely quick pace. So God knows that we will realize that we are vulnerable. God knows that we'll all see that without His help we are doomed. And that's a stark thing to say that we are doomed without God's help. But it is true. If we try and do this alone, if we try and get through this situation alone, if we try and fix society, or even just think positively and say, well, I'm sure everything's going to be okay. I'm sure the world is going to fix itself, or I'm sure that everything's going to work out fine. Well, that's very good to have a positive mindset. But there are spiritual threats out there that we cannot see and that we do not have protection against without God. And this I can guarantee you, there are spiritual threats out there that we can do absolutely nothing about unless we have God. And what is God's protection against all these spiritual threats? These dark entities, which do exist, I assure you. It's Jesus, of course. Jesus is God's shield. Jesus is God's protector against the darkness. Because the darkness that is out there has to submit to Jesus. Has to. Because Jesus is the authority above the darkness. There is no other authority over the darkness than Jesus. Yes, there are angels, there are other angels, but the only angel higher than that which you would call the devil or Lucifer or evil in its essence, in its intelligent essence, the only spiritual being greater is Jesus, I can assure you. So we can think that, well, we don't need Jesus because I've got the angels protecting me, and we don't need Jesus because everything's going to be okay, and we don't need Jesus because Jesus is just some storybook character from an old fiction book. Well, I'm here to tell you that we do need Jesus. We really need Jesus, because I know the spiritual threats we're up against. I see them. I encounter them every night. When I lie down in bed and I close my eyes, then I know that they are there, trying to pull me over into dark spaces where I'm vulnerable. And many people have this experience. They can feel the pull of darkness trying to lure their mind into fear, into anger. If your mind's getting pulled into fear and anger, even into judgment of other people, criticism of other people, harsh mental attitudes, if your mind's getting pulled into those places, then your mind is getting pulled into darkness. And that's where darkness can strike like a snake and bite us and poison us, where the growing sense of hatred, a growing sense of anger, a growing sense of self-importance, or a growing sense of weakness and fear. But when you stand with Jesus, and when Jesus is in your heart, this is impossible. Just the name Jesus alone, just that one word, Jesus, makes the darkness flee, I assure you. Jesus is the only defense you need against all of the forces of darkness. And this is a really important thing to understand, and this is why I'm telling it to you. Not because I want to preach biblical principles, not because I want to sound like I know something that you don't. I just want to share the truth with you, the spiritual truth, which is that Jesus is essential. And Jesus is a free gift. Many people think that if you call on Jesus, if you accept the help and the protection of Jesus, then you have to accept loads of other stuff. You have to become a Christian. You have to buy into the dogma or the religion of Christianity. But Jesus' protection and salvation is a free gift, totally free, to anybody who is willing to recognize that Jesus is who he says he is, and you do need him. To recognize that you need him, that's humility. We hear the word humility a lot. And humility, one meaning of humility, is that you recognize you need help. So if people aren't aware of the spiritual darkness, if people aren't aware of what the darkness can do and the power of the darkness and how it can manipulate your mind and your reality in very bizarre ways, it really can. It really can twist your mind if you have no protection. So people who aren't aware of those things think, well, I don't need any protection because I've got my own will. I've got my own strong mind. I've got my own beliefs. But we will encounter the darkness, and we will encounter its power at some point. And Jesus is fail-safe protection, guaranteed, absolutely guaranteed over anything else. Nothing else is guaranteed to protect you. So I'm here just to share this message from my heart with love, because I've been through all these paths and discovered that there are many wonderful things to learn about God, about spirituality, but the most vital thing to learn is that Jesus is needed, is really needed by all of us. And all we have to do is turn towards him, call his name, and invite him into our heart so that he can protect us and be with us always. Thank you for watching. I wish you well, and God bless.